Hey guys, my name is Cosy. Welcome back to Upside Down Books. Today we're here with a bit of a different video. Today we're going to be talking about cozy fantasy.
Non più tra I farfalloni amoroso, notte giorno di
So I actually saw somebody talking about this recently on TikTok and I thought, you know what, that's a very interesting idea. Like, what is cozy fantasy? And I want some because it sounds incredible. So I had to think about it, and today I'm going to give you my top 5 cozy fantasy recommendations that I think fit that genre. So I'll be very interested to know at the end what you guys think, if you think this fits the genre or not. But more importantly, they are all fantastic books. So when someone says cozy fantasy, I just think it's a kind of harmless fantasy that might have some serious plot lines to it, but overall is a story that you can really sink your teeth into and really get behind the characters. There's some really like golden moral characters in there who are just good, and it's just got this really like warm feeling to it, but the fantasy itself can be more of a darker nature. The setting, I don't know, that's just my way of understanding it. So I have 5 books that I want to talk about that I think are cozy fantasy, and these are all books that I've really enjoyed. So let's get into the video. The first book that I think is an excellent cozy fantasy is The Stylist C by Erin Morgenstern. I have this beautifully sprayed edition, these lovely blue edges. And in fact, this is done by a company called Fig and Flower Books. If you live in Australia, you can send your books to the person who does this to get your edges sprayed. I'll leave links down below. But this is just the quintessentially cozy fantasy, in my opinion. This is a story about books and about stories. It is magical realism, it's partially nonsensical, but it's just this really capturing tale, and you just love the characters in it. It has plenty of queer representation as well, which is always a big tick. So it follows this main character called Zachary, who is doing his PhD or master's at university, and he goes to the library and finds this book. And when he reads this book, he finds a story from his own childhood in it, and he gets really confused as to how someone could have been there for that moment, how somebody could have known about that, and he just gets sucked into this mystery. And it's all about this book and all about the world that it leads into with the Stylist C. So the Stylist C is this hidden world that you enter through doorways, and there is sort of a good and an evil side to people who are destroying the doors, who don't want people to find this world. And then there's Zachary and all the people that he meets on the way who are trying to basically protect the world and the people in it. There are some really wonderful characters that help him along the way. There is a guy called Dorian who's a really confusing character, and you don't really know for like the longest of times which side he's truly on and whether he cares about Zachary's safety or not, and eventually more than just about his safety. There's this beautiful like bellhop custodian of the hotel that you end up in when you go through these doors to enter the world of the Stylist C. And there are some other characters as well that you meet as you go through it. And I just think this is the perfect cozy read. It's a wonderfully like chunky book. It is about 480 to 500 pages depending on your edition. It's one of these nice big floppy ones, and it's the perfect book to sit down at nighttime in winter with a blanket and a cup of hot chocolate and just read and really lose yourself in the story and enter this totally different world. The next cozy fantasy that I want to talk about is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and that is The Beast's Heart by Leif Shawcross. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce the author's name. So this one, I just think that the cover screams cozy fantasy to me. There's something about the copper foil on this one that just gives me these vibes. It's this wonderful story about this girl called Isabeau, and she ends up at the Beast's castle as per the original fairy tale. One of the most whimsical things about this that really gives it that cozy fantasy vibe is the fact that time doesn't pass in the same way within the castle as it does outside, and whenever she's there and she's sort of trying to come to terms with her own grief of leaving her family in order to save her father as per the original fairy tale, there is just this sadness and slowness to the story. Even it's not like a slow read, but it just gives, it really feels like time is paused as you are in this castle that is magical, where things appear, like you can talk to the house and the house will provide you with the food or the clothing that you need. And it's this wonderful place for Isabeau to process that grief. And then you have the parallel story of the Beast himself, who is also upset as he comes to love Isabeau quite quickly, as he does in the fairy tale originally, and it's the way that he copes with that. It's the way that there's this special mirror like you have in the fairy tale, but through it he's able to watch in real time what's happening to Isabeau's family outside of the magical realm of his castle. The way that the seasons change throughout the windows, and like the way that the characters are watching it, and the way that Isabeau goes out into the gardens for her walks has this really cozy fantasy feel to it. So I think this is a really great short read to settle into and really enjoy the world that's been painted in this book. It's something quite special and it's a very enjoyable read, and I think it's probably one of my favorite retellings of Beauty and the Beast that I've read so far. The next one, in fact the next three that I want to talk about are for middle grade readers, but I think that they fit the category really well. So the next cozy fantasy I've got for you is Ranger's Apprentice. So this is The Ruins of Gorland. It's number one. It's really short. There are 13 books in this series and there are heaps of spin-off series as well, but it's set in this make-believe medieval fantasy world, and the pace of the plot in some of them has this real cozy feel to it. The main characters are rangers. They ride on horseback with these horses that they are like almost able to communicate with how in tune they are with each other's senses. And I think that just the image of like a motley cloaked figure atop this like beautiful, tall, sturdy horse going through the countrysides and defeating any villains or brigands that they come across. It's just got this wonderful cozy fantasy feeling to it. Now some of the books are definitely a little bit more into the adventurous side of things. I think some of them probably step outside of the cozy genre, but I certainly think this is worth a mention and definitely worth a read if you haven't read it yet, because the world that this is set in when it comes to where Will and Holt, the two main characters of this story, are going is just something you can get really immersed in, and you slowly, as you progress through the series, kind of get a better grasp of the size of the world. And there's just something very warm about medieval fantasy, in my opinion, that just, I don't know, I think it's the simpler lifestyle and other aspects like that in the world building itself that give it that cozy feeling to me. It's a very safe fantasy story. The next one I want to talk about is one that I can't say cozy fantasy and not think of it, and that is The Tale of Despero by Kate DiCamillo. If you haven't read this is like children's fiction and it is a beautiful story. I don't think I need to say too much about this, but it's about this mouse Despero who wants to be a knight. He reads in this picture book about this knight who saves a princess, and he wants to save the princess from the rats. So there's like this rat colony underneath the princess's castle and whatnot, and I think one of the king or the queen dies at some point, and it is this beautiful, simple children's story about this mouse trying to be the princess's prince. Even though he is a mouse and she's a human, he's doing everything he can with his tiny little sword to try and defeat the villains and the foes and make the world a safe place again. So if you haven't read this yet, then this really is quintessential cozy fantasy. And that brings me to the last book I want to talk about that I'm classifying as a cozy fantasy read, and that is The Dollmaker of Krakow, or Krakow, depending on how you want to pronounce it, by R.M. Ramiro. Now this is a beautiful story about a doll that comes to life during World War II in Poland. It's about this dollmaker who's this old, aging man who runs a toy shop, and in his grief and sadness about the state of the world and the fact that he can sense that Poland is on the brink and the world is on the brink of slipping into another world war. He lost his leg in World War I and he really doesn't want to do it again. In his grief, he manages to carve the doll, which is Carolina, and he brings her to life. He like manages to infuse magic into the doll that captures her soul from the land of the dolls and brings her into the human world. So you have two paralleling stories here with Carolina's memories of her time in the land of the dolls, which is also war-ridden, and then you have her in the present storyline trying to help this old man cope with his grief, his shyness, his sadness, and his loneliness. And along the way, they meet some Jewish friends. They meet this beautiful young girl called Rena and her father, and they try and help save them from the Nazis using their magic. It is such a beautiful story, and it just screams cozy fantasy. Even though it is kind of a bit of historical fiction, there is that wonderful like magical whimsy that is throughout the story. So I think it's well deserved of being on this list of cozy fantasy. It's not very long to read either, and I think in particular the format of the hardback has like these extra attention to details that really draws you into the cozy world, and some of them you have like full border page illustrations which are just stunning. So those are my 5 cozy fantasy recommendations. So let me know down in the comments below if you agree, and if you have any recommendations for me of cozy fantasies that you read and what you think of this genre, because I just think it is such a wonderful idea and such a satisfying genre to read. So do let me know down in the comments below, but other than that, I will see you in my next video. Goodbye.